And the fragile ceasefire in West Asia, it stands shattered as the US and Iran exchanged fire over the Strait of Hormuz.
And the UAE reported attacks for the first time since the truce was declared nearly a month ago. Now, the hostilities resumed after U.S. President Donald Trump had announced Project Freedom, a plan for American forces to guide vessels from neutral countries through the strait.
U.S. Central Command claimed its forces sank 6 small Iranian vessels using Apache and Seahawk helicopters. Admiral Bradley Cooper said that the action came after Iran fired at American warships and commercial vessels. He added that 2 U.S. guided missile destroyers passed through the strait into the Gulf, while 2 U.S.-flagged merchant vessels transited the opposite way.
But Iran has disputed all American claims, including the sinking of Iranian boats. Iran media, citing military sources, say that U.S. targeted 2 civilian boats carrying goods towards Iran and not IRGC speedboats, killing 5 civilians. Iranian state television said its Navy fired cruise missiles, rockets, and combat drones near U.S. destroyers as warning shots. It also reiterated its control of the crucial waterway.
Within this demarcated area, any ship that wants to pass through must do so with the permission of the Islamic Republic's armed forces in order to be safe. Any vessel belonging to a hostile enemy that tries to pass through will be dealt with decisively.
U.S. President Trump said no significant damage had occurred as a result of the recent Iranian strikes, except to a South Korean vessel. In an interview with Fox News, he reiterated that Iranian forces would be blown off the face of the earth if they targeted U.S. ships.
At another event, President Donald Trump referred to the conflict with Iran as a mini-war and said it is working out very nicely. Listen to this.
Like, we have a war right now. And went to 6 weeks? They said, what's taking so long? We were in Vietnam 19 years. We're in Iraq for many years, 10 years, 12 years. We were in all these different wars. Korea, 7 years. I won't even mention World War II. That's a big baby. Booming now, despite the fact that we're in I call it a mini war, because that's all they are. They don't have a Navy anymore. Think of it. They had 159 ships. How many do they have left, Kelly? Out of 159, take a guess. She's very smart. 0.
The UAE, a close U.S. ally and key Arab partner of Israel, said that it came under a barrage of missiles and drones from Iran. Its air defenses intercepted 19 Iranian missiles and drones, and a drone attack caused a fire at an oil port in the Fujairah region. Now, the UAE has ordered all schools to switch to remote learning for the rest of the ongoing week.
Now, however, shortly after these reports, a senior Iranian official suggested it may have been a false flag attack. Ibrahim Azizi, head of the National Security Commission of the Iranian parliament, shared a post on X calling it a false flag.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said the clashes in the Strait of Hormuz showed there was no military solution to a political crisis. He warned that the United States and the UAE against being drawn into a quagmire by ill-wishers, adding that Project Freedom is Project Deadlock.
And to discuss more on this, we're now being joined live by Adrian Calmel. He is a fellow at Arabian Peninsula Institute and author of a forthcoming book on Hezbollah. Thank you so much for being with us on the broadcast. It's always a pleasure talking to you. And well, of course, it's been how many, more than 2 months now, and it seems like the ceasefire looks very fragile at the moment. Although it also looks like both of the sides do not want to escalate it. How do you observe this situation?
Well, good to see you, Jyotsna, and good morning to you as well, and to your viewers. What we've seen and what I've observed over the last, as you said, the ceasefire is the regime and the enemy always get to vote, and their last piece of leverage and their vote was to close the Strait of Hormuz, or the specter of closing it, saying that certain areas are mined people were uncertain if they were actually mined, and really forcing ships into one area. And during that time, that's when you start to see talks about peace proposals, or at least ceasefire agreements, and trying to work out the Strait of Hormuz. During that time, what you saw is the move by the Trump administration, and it was to blockade the regime ports and really put the regime in a tight spot where they have run out. They will, within probably about 20 to 30 days at the most, run out of places to store oil. And what that will also lead to is fuel shortages inside of Iran. They have not been able to export anything. We have been able to go around and actually go after some of the ghost fleets that were illicit sanctioned oil that had already made it past the blockade. So you see a real vice being put around the regime. And now the last part of it is this U.S. naval escort. We control the air over the Persian Gulf right now, and the regime, for what they have as far as a naval force left are those swift boats, or those what they call bog hammers. So what you're seeing are kind of like the death throes of a regime. I do think this will go kinetic, and we are going to see an uptick in the military action, just gauging how the regime will respond.
Adrian, the uptick in military action, as you foresee it, in keeping in line with that, at this point, is it safe to say that the ceasefire is over? And if you do not agree with that, would you feel UAE would agree with what I'm asking? The ceasefire is over. They have missiles coming at them.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you, Siobhan. It is over for all intents and purposes. It is over. The UAE has been targeted so much and throughout. It is, the U.S. naval escort is hugging the line, the coastline of the UAE and avoiding the Islamic Republic. That may have been one reason why they rocketed the UAE, and it was not a false flag. The regime did this, and again, it's them lashing out at their neighbors and further isolating themselves. And the UAE has made some moves to really try, pulling out of OPEC, looking at routes to where they don't have to longer worry about the Strait of Hormuz as far as piping oil across the country.
But that being said, Mr. Kamel, of course, as you mentioned, Iran has denied and said that it could have been a false flag. And do you think the Gulf countries actually have the appetite to actually go for another round of, these conflict? Because at this moment, Kuwait, their oil has been cut off. They've stopped producing it, and obviously these regions have been affected very much. It's been some time that the air has been open to them. So do you think they would have the appetite to go into a conflict further, or would you think that they would take part in de-escalating it in every possible way?
I think you have to really look country by country, but when it comes to the UAE, I think that they're saying, what are you waiting for, President Trump? Let's finish this job here. When you look at Kuwait, they've certainly been hurt, but they've also been in the crosshairs. Going back to the Iran-Iraq war and their support for Iraq, they've been targeted by the regime. So they've always had a really dangerous dangerous neighborhood with a regime that is aligned against them. So Kuwait, they don't have the appetite. Saudi Arabia probably doesn't have the appetite, but at the same time, the neighborhood, they understand the neighborhood for them will be a much safer place. The UAE has at least been able to say, we're not going to play on the fence here. We're going to counter the Islamic Republic in Yemen. We're going to counter the Islamic Republic in Sudan. We're going to counter them where we can, because we see this ideology as corrosive.
Adrian, and understanding the divergent nature of Donald Trump's statements without delving too much into nuances or what he says, but if you just largely look at how he is looking at the war, initially the timeline was 4 to 5 weeks, and eventually those statements said a lot of things like it's just an excursion. Now He's giving references to wars fought for years and even decades together, and he's calling it a mini war. Is the US now finally coming to terms with what is really happening, at least Donald Trump?
I would say this is more political posturing on the inside. There has been, and really, there's been a push by members of Congress to put the War Powers Act in front of President Trump and really limit him. And it kicks in after 60 days of military activities. And so we've seen that over the past week. We saw members Hegseth coming before Congress and having to testify. So Trump is doing this, saying, well, no, it's it hasn't been kinetic for over a month now. So can you really call it a war? So I would say this is more political posturing on his part, and to the point where it's a different war than we fought in, I can remember, recorded history. Just the way you look at the combined Air Force, air power, and naval power that's been used. So it's different in that matter.
So would it be true to say that now U.S. is now testing and playing the waiting game? Because just about a day before, when this is Trump who said that there is a possibility that U.S. could restart the strikes on Iran, and we saw, of course, these a little bit of strikes just yesterday. And then he also talked about that he will soon review the proposal from Iran, but he's already casting doubt on the prospects. It doesn't seem like he wants to talk on the peace talks, and he was already suspecting that, okay, you know what, we're just going to use power and get done with this thing.
Yeah, well, there's two things here. The regime's proposals have been completely unserious, pushing the nuclear timeline and just not wanting to talk about that, asking for the United States to pay for complete reparations of the war. These are complete, absolute non-starters, so it's not going to happen. When you look at this next, what we're seeing from the United States with the naval escorts, it's starting to offer, hopefully start to offer some stability to the oil markets, but it's also going to show that, with U.S. firepower, you are going to be able to transit through that Strait of Hormuz. And I would also say it's a probe. It's to see what the regime does, how they respond. Do they say, okay, you know what, we're gonna cry uncle on this one and come to the table and be really serious about this? Or do they continue along the same game of trying to obfuscate and push the ball down the road?
Adrian, saying that Iran is not being serious with terms for the ceasefire, that's an argument they hold as well against the US. When Lebanon was supposed to be part of it, the Pakistani Prime Minister had also tweeted, and eventually the US went back on it. There was scheduled a round of talks before J.D. Vance decided to go back after that initial round of 21-hour talks, and which did not lead to a result, and then it never happened after that. So those are complaints coming in from both sides. Let's wait and watch how this one goes. That was Adrian Calamil joining us. Always a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.